Hello, welcome to the channel Wise Stories. Enjoy watching.
The girl worked as a nurse and took side jobs at a nursing home just to make ends meet. She was assigned to an old man whom everyone else had refused to care for. When she accidentally knocked over his bedside table, she froze, staring at a photograph of a woman that had fallen out. The wind outside howled like a stray dog, hurling handfuls of fine autumn rain against the window pane. Veronica shivered and pulled the worn-out blanket tighter around herself. The dormitory room was damp and cold. The heating still hadn't been turned on, even though it was already mid-October. She once again regretted not buying a space heater last month when she received a small bonus. But the money had gone toward new pharmacology textbooks, essential for her third year of medical school. Veronica reached for her cup of cold tea and glanced at her battered wallet lying on the edge of the table. Her scholarship had run out a week ago, and her next paycheck from the district clinic where she worked part-time was still 10 days away. 2 crumpled bills lay forlornly inside the wallet, barely enough to cover bus fare to work and back. Same old story, Santana, she muttered to herself. Feast or famine? Laughter and loud music drifted from the neighboring room, where 2 friends from the economics department lived. They often hosted gatherings with classmates. They had invited Veronica as well, but she usually declined. She had neither time nor money for parties, and she had never been particularly sociable anyway. Her orphanage upbringing had ingrained a habit of keeping to herself. With a sigh, Veronica returned to her notes. She had a test tomorrow, and she hadn't even reviewed half the material yet. Her eyes grew heavy with exhaustion. It had been a double shift at the clinic today because one of the nurses was sick. Veronica deliberately accepted any extra shifts the head nurse offered. She could never afford to turn down extra money. Her phone buzzed quietly, a new message. It was from Paulina, her dorm mate, with whom she sometimes studied for exams. Veronica, want to go to the movies tomorrow after classes? I have 2 tickets, my friend got sick. Veronica looked at the message with regret. The idea of going to the movies was tempting, a much-needed break, but after classes tomorrow she had to rush to her shift at the clinic, and after that, she still needed to study for her surgery exam. Sorry, I can't. Work and study. Maybe another time. The reply came almost instantly. Too bad. You're working yourself to death. If you change your mind, let me know. Veronica set down her phone and rubbed her tired eyes. Paulina was right, she was working too much for a student, but there was no other choice. The small orphan's pension and her scholarship barely covered basic living expenses in the city. The next day, after her shift at the clinic, Veronica trudged slowly down the corridor, dreaming of nothing but reaching her dorm bed. Passing by the bulletin board, she absent-mindedly glanced over the colorful flyers. Most had been there for months, ads for massage therapists, tutors, used medical textbooks. But one notice was new, a bright white sheet pinned over the others. Nursing home care is hiring part-time nurses. Good pay, flexible hours. Veronica stopped. Good pay sounded promising, and if the schedule was truly flexible, maybe she could juggle it with her classes and clinic work. She snapped a photo of the flyer with the listed phone number and hurried toward the exit. Outside, it had turned bitterly cold, the icy air stung her lungs. She pulled her thin autumn jacket tighter around herself. She couldn't afford a new winter coat yet, another reason to seek extra income. At home, after brewing a cheap tea bag, she dialed the number from the flyer. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. Nursing home care, human resources, Teodora Suarez speaking. Hello, my name is Veronica Santana. I'm calling about the part-time nurse position. The conversation was short and businesslike. Teodora Suarez asked a few questions about Veronica's qualifications and work experience, inquired whether she was still studying, and finally invited her for an interview at 3 p.m. the next day. Do you have experience working with elderly patients? She asked before hanging up. At the clinic, I often work with elderly patients, Veronica answered. I get along with them well. Good. We'll see. Until tomorrow, Veronica. That night, Veronica had trouble falling asleep, imagining how her schedule would change if she got the job at CARE. Morning and afternoon, university, evenings, clinic, weekends, nursing home. It would be tough, but if the pay was really good. The CARE nursing home was located in a historic 3-story mansion on the outskirts of town. It had once been a sanatorium, now turned into a private institution for the elderly whose families could afford good care. Veronica spent a while observing the building before climbing the wide marble steps. The well-kept grounds, clean pathways, and neatly placed benches all spoke of a well-funded facility. Maybe the pay was as good as promised. Teodora Suarez turned out to be an energetic woman in her 50s, wearing a neat business suit and sporting a short, stylish haircut touched with gray. She quickly scanned Veronica's documents, asked a few more questions, then smiled unexpectedly. "You seem like a good fit. You look responsible, and that's the most important thing when working with our residents. When could you start?" "Tomorrow, if needed," Veronica replied without hesitation. "Could you tell me the working hours?" "We can offer you full-day shifts on weekends, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., said Teodora Suarez, naming the salary. Hearing the amount, Veronica almost gasped in joy. 2 days' work would earn her almost as much as half a month at the clinic. "Yes, of course," she nodded. "That's a very good offer." "Excellent." Teodora handed her a folder with documents. "Let's get the paperwork done. I'll expect you this Saturday. And now, I'll ask our senior nurse, Natalia Santana, to give you a short tour and introduce you to the team." Natalia Santana, a plump elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, reminded Veronica of Aunt Esmeralda from the orphanage, equally caring and bustling. She led Veronica down long corridors, showing her the patient rooms, procedure rooms, dining area, library, and even a small winter garden. "We have good conditions here," she said. "Many of our residents stay for years. Their families visit, of course, but not as often as they would like. So, the staff becomes like family to them." "How many residents do you have?" Veronica asked. "Right now, 56. Each floor has its own nurse and 2 orderlies. You'll be working on the 3rd floor. That's where our, let's say, most challenging residents are." "Challenging how?" Veronica asked cautiously. Natalia sighed. "Some are bitter. They don't want to be here and resent their families. Some suffer from dementia, which brings its own difficulties. And then..." She hesitated. "Then there are the particularly demanding ones. Like Miguel Petrovich Navarro. Former conservatory professor, very educated but with a difficult temperament." "What kind of temperament?" Veronica asked, bracing herself. "He refuses to take his medication, is rude to the staff, won't let anyone near him. Many nurses have given up. The last one lasted just a month before asking for a transfer." Veronica nodded. She was used to difficult patients. She had dealt with worse at the clinic. "I'll manage," she said quietly but firmly. "I hope so," Natalia smiled. "I really do. Miguel Navarro is an interesting man, but very lonely. His son lives abroad and only visits once a year, if that. Maybe you'll be able to reach him." They finished the tour, and Natalia walked Veronica to the exit. "See you Saturday, Veronica. Come by 7:30. I'll meet you and show you everything." Walking home, Veronica thought about her new job. With that salary, she could finally afford a winter coat in a month. Maybe, if she saved carefully, there'd even be enough for a small Christmas gift for herself. She had long dreamed of a new phone. Her old one was barely functioning. At home, while waiting for the kettle to boil, Veronica realized she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Of everything she had seen at CARE, it was Professor Navarro who intrigued her the most. She wanted to learn his story, to see who hid behind the mask of a grumpy, irritable old man. Maybe because she had never had a grandfather, or even parents. Veronica barely remembered anything about her family. She had only been told that her mother had died giving birth to her, and her father, heartbroken, had soon drunk himself to death. No photos, no letters, no belongings, only a misty void where a family should have been. At the orphanage, she had been taught not to ask too many questions and not to hope for miracles. She grew up as a quiet, diligent child, always studying hard and causing no trouble. When the time came to choose a profession, her caregivers suggested nursing. Her good grades and calm disposition made her a perfect candidate. Veronica agreed. Medicine seemed like a noble path. Graduating from nursing college with honors, she immediately enrolled in medical school, dreaming of becoming a doctor. Studying while working was tough, but giving up had never been an option for her. Loneliness didn't weigh heavily on her, or so she told herself. She had few friends and no boyfriend. There was simply no time, and besides, who would want her, an orphan with no connections and no money? Sometimes, though, the loneliness became unbearable, like the wind howling outside her window. In such moments, Veronica would take out her old plush teddy bear, the only link to her past. The worn bear had been with her for as long as she could remember, perhaps a gift from her mother. "We'll manage," she would whisper, clutching the bear to her chest like she had as a child. "We always do, right?" Saturday arrived before she knew it. Veronica woke up at 6, even though her alarm was set for 6:30. Nerves wouldn't let her sleep. Today was her first day at the new job, and she was determined to make a good impression. She dressed carefully, styled her hair into a neat bun as a nurse should, and headed to care. Natalia Santana met her at the entrance and guided her to the 3rd floor. Along the way, she explained the duties, daily routine, procedures, and details about the residents. "Here's the medication schedule, the patient charts, and the observation log," she said, showing her around the nurse's station. "We start rounds at 9 a.m. after breakfast. First, distribute morning meds, then measure blood pressure for those who need it, followed by scheduled procedures." Veronica listened attentively, memorizing every detail. Finally, Natalia handed her a thin folder. "And this is Miguel Navarro's medical file. I would suggest starting with him. He gets up early and doesn't like being disturbed after 9. Says it disrupts his work schedule." "Work?" Veronica asked, surprised. "But he's retired. He's writing his memoirs," Natalia smiled. "Or at least he says he is. No one has ever seen a single page. But his desk is always covered with papers, pens, and notes. Maybe he really is working. Either way, try to find a way to connect with him. He's a good man, just very lonely and bitter." Veronica nodded, took the folder, and made her way to the room that had been pointed out. Her mind buzzed with questions. Who was this professor? Why was he so difficult? Would she be able to reach him? She knocked on the door of room 312. Receiving no response, she cautiously stepped inside. The first thing she noticed was the overwhelming number of books. They were everywhere, on shelves, along the walls, on the nightstand, on the wide windowsill, even stacked in piles on the floor near the bed. The man in the armchair by the window didn't even turn his head at the sound of the door opening. "Another one," he grumbled. "How many of you are they going to send? I said I wanted peace." Veronica took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. For some reason, she very much wanted to make a good impression on this grumpy old man. "Good morning, Senor Navarro," she said calmly. "My name is Veronica. I'm your new nurse." Miguel slowly turned in his chair. A tall, thin old man with sharp features and piercing blue eyes gave Veronica a scrutinizing look. For a moment, something like surprise flickered in his gaze, but then he immediately frowned. "Another trainee?" he muttered. "How many more are they going to send?" I told Natalia Santana clearly, "I don't want to see anyone." "I'm not a trainee," Veronica replied calmly, pulling a small packet of pills from her pocket. "I'm a licensed nurse and a third-year medical student. And right now, it's time for your medication." The old man snorted. "I'm not taking that poison. It only ruins the stomach. I lived 90 years without those chemicals, and I'll live some more." 83, Veronica corrected, glancing at the medical file. "And if you want to reach 90, it's better to take the prescribed medication." It's for your blood pressure, you know. Miguel gave her a disgruntled look. Smart mouth, huh? They teach you at that school to sass old men? Veronica didn't react to the provocation. Calmly, she poured some water into a glass, placed it on the table next to the professor's chair, and laid the pills beside it. I'll leave them here. If you decide to take them, I'll be glad. If not, that's your choice, she said, pausing to glance around the room. You have an impressive library. Lots of books on music, I see. Something in her tone made the old man lift his head. And do you know anything about music? He asked skeptically. Not really, Veronica admitted honestly. There was an old piano in the orphanage, but no one really knew how to play it. Sometimes a music teacher from the neighboring school would visit and show us a few simple melodies. She hadn't intended to mention the orphanage, it just slipped out. But she noticed how the old man's gaze softened, becoming more attentive. An orphanage, huh? He murmured. And what did you play on that piano? Veronica smiled, recalling. The beginning of Für Elise by Beethoven, the Dog Waltz, and some lullaby, I don't remember whose. Not exactly impressive, Miguel grunted, though without his earlier sharpness. Not impressive at all. Do you know Chopin? Only by name, Veronica admitted. A nocturne, a polonaise. I've heard the names, but not the pieces. The professor shook his head. Ignorance. And you call yourself educated. An educated person should know the arts. Then teach me, Veronica suggested unexpectedly. You've got plenty of time here, and I come every weekend. You can educate your ignorant nurse. Miguel raised his eyebrows in surprise, then unexpectedly smirked. You're quite cheeky, aren't you? Just practical, Veronica retorted. So, what about the medicine? Will you take it? The old man glanced at the pills, then at Veronica, as if weighing something, and finally sighed, reaching for the glass. Fine, give me your poison. But only because you intrigued me with your ignorance about music. Someone's got to save the younger generation from cultural collapse. Veronica nodded silently, hiding her smile. A small, but significant victory. The next day, when Veronica entered Miguel's room, she found him not in his usual armchair, but seated at a small writing desk. Open music notebooks and sheets filled with handwriting lay before him. Good morning, Veronica greeted him. Did you sleep well? Tolerably, he grunted without looking up from his papers. I already took the medication on the nightstand. You can leave. I can't, she countered. I need to check your blood pressure and temperature. That's the protocol. Miguel grumbled, pushing his papers aside. Fine, get it over with quickly. Can't you see I'm working? Veronica swiftly wrapped the blood pressure cuff around his arm. Writing your memoirs? She asked as she inflated the cuff. What makes you think that? Natalia Santana mentioned it. About music? The old man gave a small grunt. What else? I gave my whole life to music. Now I want to leave something behind. Though who would care is a big question. Why wouldn't they care? Veronica said sincerely, recording the reading. Your blood pressure is normal. And as for the memoirs, I would read them. I'm sure they're fascinating. You'd find them interesting, the professor said skeptically. You don't even know Chopin. Which is why I need to catch up on my education, Veronica smiled. Besides, I'm interested in people's stories. And I'm sure you have a remarkable one. Miguel squinted at her slightly. You're cunning, girl. Trying to stroke an old man's ego? Veronica hesitated. Not at all, I just... All right, he waved her off. Go do your job. You must have plenty of other patients. The following Saturday, Veronica brought Miguel a small gift, a volume of poetry by Boris Pasternak. Why? The professor asked, surprised. I already have Pasternak. This one's special, Veronica explained. It has poems about music. I found it yesterday in a used bookstore, and I immediately thought of you. Miguel carefully took the book, leafed through it, found the bookmark Veronica had placed, and read an excerpt aloud. He looked up at her. "And what do you think of these lines?" "I think they capture the power of music," she said carefully, "when the notes on the page come alive when played." The professor raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You're not as simple as you seem. Sit down." He pointed to a chair by his desk. Veronica obeyed, even though she knew she should be attending to other patients. "Do you know what's most important in music?" Miguel asked, staring off into the distance. "Not technique, not reading notes, not even talent. The most important thing is to feel." He suddenly stood up and went to a small shelf where an old cassette player sat. After rummaging through a box of tapes, he chose one, inserted it, and pressed play. The room filled with the sound of a piano, gentle, melting, like raindrops on glass. "Chopin, Nocturne in E-flat major," Miguel explained. "What do you feel?" Veronica closed her eyes and listened. "Sadness," she said. "But not hopeless sadness. More like a gentle sorrow, like remembering something beautiful that's gone." She opened her eyes and met Miguel's gaze. He was looking at her differently now, without the usual guarded sharpness. "Not bad for a start," he nodded. "Next time we'll listen to something else. Now go, you have things to do." Thus began their unusual music lessons. Every Saturday and Sunday, after completing her medical procedures, Veronica would stay with Miguel Navarro for half an hour or an hour, and they would listen to different composers together. The professor would tell her about various eras and styles, sharing stories from his conservatory days. Little by little, he began to soften. There were no longer any problems with him taking his medication. He now took all his prescribed treatments without resistance. He also started eating better, whereas before he often had to be coaxed into touching his food. "Some of your colleagues think I've lost my mind," Miguel said one day, "but I'm simply tired of meaningless chatter. Why waste time on empty conversations when there's still so much work to be done?" "What work?" Veronica asked as she changed the bandage on his arm, where an injection had been administered recently. "Memoirs, my girl, memoirs. I'm not just writing about myself, I'm preserving the history of our music academy. Many are no longer alive, but I remember," his voice trembled, "I remember it all, the people, the music, the time." One Sunday, Miguel greeted Veronica with unusual liveliness. "Sit down," he said, nodding toward the chair. "I've been thinking, you never really told me about yourself. How did an orphan manage to get into medical school? It's no easy feat." Veronica was surprised by his interest but answered, "I studied hard at the orphanage's school, graduated with a gold medal. Then I got a government scholarship to medical college, finished with honors, and went straight into medical school. I'm now in my third year." Miguel peered at her face as if searching for something. "And your last name?" "Santana." Something flickered in the old man's eyes, perhaps surprise, or maybe concern. "Do you know your mother's name?" Veronica shook her head. "No. They told me almost nothing. I don't even know where she's buried." She paused, then asked, "Why are you asking?" Miguel Navarro seemed to snap out of his reverie. "Just curiosity," he said, deliberately casual. "Professional habit, taking an interest in people." Then he abruptly changed the subject. "Now, shall we listen to Rachmaninoff today? I promised you last time." From that day on, Miguel began asking Veronica more questions about her life. He wanted to know everything: where the orphanage was located, what subjects she liked in school, whether she had ever been to musical theaters. Sometimes, he would stare at her for a long time with a strange look. Once, Veronica noticed him pulling a photograph from his desk drawer and comparing it to her face. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "No, everything's fine," the old man replied quietly, hiding the photo. "It's just remarkable, that's all." In her first month working at CARE, Veronica visited Miguel Navarro only on weekends, as scheduled. But little by little, she began dropping by during the week as well, whenever she was nearby after university classes or a shift at the clinic. She found it strange herself, this urge to check on the grumpy old man, but she told herself it was simply professional care for her patient. "You work too much," Miguel noted once, when she showed up exhausted one Wednesday evening. "Why push yourself so hard?" "I need the money," Veronica answered simply. "I have to live somehow." She didn't mention that she was saving for a winter coat and a new phone. It seemed too trivial compared to his life, filled with music and art. "And do you have any time left for a personal life?" he asked unexpectedly. "A young woman needs more than just work." Veronica shrugged. "No time for that. Study, work, side jobs. It's a closed circle." "A closed circle," the professor repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, life sometimes draws circles that only close after many years." She didn't understand what he meant, but didn't press him. Miguel often spoke in riddles, especially when he was tired. In early November, an incident occurred at Care. One of the elderly residents fell and broke her hip. While preparing her for transport to the hospital, she screamed so loudly in pain that the entire floor was thrown into turmoil. Many residents grew agitated, and Miguel, hearing the commotion, tried to stand up too quickly and lost his balance. Veronica, rushing over, barely managed to catch him before he fell. "Careful," she exclaimed. "You could have hurt yourself." "What's going to happen to me?" he grumbled, but it was clear he was shaken. "Who's screaming?" "Rosana Pascual fell." "Don't worry, they're taking her to the hospital now." "She'll be fine," Veronica reassured him, helping him back into his chair. She noticed his hands were trembling. "Señor Navarro, would you like me to bring you a sedative?" "No," he said sharply. "Just sit with me for a bit. Tell me something. About your studies, maybe." And so Veronica talked, about a difficult surgery exam, about her internship in the emergency department, about her future plans. Gradually, Miguel's hand stopped trembling, and his breathing steadied. "You know," he said unexpectedly as Veronica was about to leave, "I'm glad you're the one who became my nurse. With you, it's peaceful." She smiled. "Thank you. I'm glad too." On her way home, Veronica thought about how much Miguel Navarro had changed over the past weeks. From a prickly, withdrawn old man, he had become an engaging companion, sharp-witted and unexpectedly humorous. He could still be sharp-tongued, especially when criticizing modern music, which he called nothing but dreadful noise, but his sharpness no longer hurt. Veronica had learned to see that it was born of a fierce love for classical music. She also noticed how often Miguel now looked at her with a certain strange expression, as if trying to find something familiar in her features. And every time she caught that gaze, she felt a chill, as if he knew something about her that she herself did not. December brought the first snow and the biting wind. Veronica had finally bought a new winter coat with the money she earned at Care. As she walked through the snow-covered park surrounding the nursing home, she thought about her upcoming exams. Miguel Navarro had promised to help her prepare for her Latin exam. He had once known the language exceptionally well. Miguel's room was warm and cozy. Outside, large snowflakes spun in the air, while inside, the air smelled of medicines and old books, a smell that Veronica had grown used to and, strangely, had come to associate with home, even though she had never had a real home. "Good morning, Señor Navarro," she greeted him as she entered the room. "Did you sleep well?" "Not bad," the old man nodded, adjusting his glasses. He sat at his desk as usual, surrounded by papers. "You seem particularly cheerful today. Something good happen?" "I passed my preliminary pharmacology test," Veronica smiled, pulling a blood pressure monitor from her coat pocket. "Top marks. And I finally bought a winter coat." "Well done," the professor nodded approvingly. "Studies come first. As for the coat." He hesitated. "I could have helped, you know." "Thank you, but I managed on my own," Veronica said gently but firmly. She never accepted such help, considering it a form of charity. Let's check your blood pressure first, and then, if you're not too tired, we can work on Latin. Miguel extended his arm for the cuff. You're so stubborn, Veronica. Just like your mother. She looked at him in surprise. My mother? But you didn't know my mother. Slip of the tongue, the old man said quickly. I meant, perhaps you inherited her character. Veronica decided not to press, although the comment struck her as odd. She finished measuring his blood pressure and recorded it in the observation log. A bit elevated, but nothing serious. Lunch will be here soon. I'll change your bedsheets while there's still time, all right? The professor nodded and returned to his papers, while Veronica set about changing the bed linens. As she was tucking in the fresh sheets, she accidentally bumped into the nightstand. The top drawer slid open, and papers, envelopes, and photographs spilled onto the floor. Oh, I'm sorry, Veronica exclaimed, quickly kneeling to gather them up. I'm so clumsy. It's all right, Miguel said without turning around. Just be careful, there are some important photographs there. Veronica hurriedly began collecting the scattered papers when her gaze fell upon an old photograph. From the yellowed picture, a young woman gazed at her, noble features, a soft half-smile, and eyes full of light. But it wasn't just her beauty that stunned Veronica, the woman looked exactly like her. The same face shape, the same high cheekbones, the same slanted eyes. Only the hairstyle was different, and the woman's gaze was more confident, more radiant than anything Veronica had ever seen in her own reflection. Senor Navarro, she called out in a trembling voice, who is this woman? The professor turned sharply. Seeing the photograph in Veronica's hands, he turned pale. Where did you find that? He asked quietly. It fell out of the nightstand. Who is she? Why does she look so much like me? Miguel slowly removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He suddenly looked older, exhausted. I didn't know how to tell you, he finally said. I wasn't sure I had the right. I didn't want to stir up the past. What past? Veronica stepped closer to him, still holding the photograph. Please, tell me, who is this woman? The old man took a deep breath and gestured for Veronica to sit down. This is Margarita Santana, he said quietly. My best student. She died in a car accident many years ago. Veronica's heart skipped a beat. Santana, she repeated. My name is Veronica Santana. I know, Miguel nodded. That's what stunned me when you first introduced yourself. Then I began to notice the resemblance. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. But the more I got to know you, the more obvious it became, you're her daughter. The room seemed to spin before Veronica's eyes. She clutched the edge of the table to keep from falling. This is impossible, she whispered. I would have known. They would have told me at the orphanage. What did they tell you? The professor asked, watching her intently. That my mother died during childbirth, and my father soon after. That no relatives were found, so I ended up in the orphanage. Miguel shook his head. That's not how it happened. Your mother did die, but you were already born. You were about a year old when the accident occurred. And my father? She asked. He hesitated. Your father grieved terribly. He couldn't bear the loss of Margarita. He took you and moved to another city. 2 years later, I learned that he, too, had passed away from a heart attack, as far as I know. I tried to find you, but the trail had gone cold. Veronica slowly sat down at the table. Her mind swirled with 1,000 questions, but she couldn't decide where to start. And how do you know all this? She finally asked. Miguel Navarro sighed heavily. I was her teacher at the conservatory. More than that, I was her godfather. Her godfather? Veronica looked at him in disbelief. Then, you're my godfather? Yes, he answered simply. Though what kind of godfather was I, if I couldn't find you when you needed me most? There was such sincere remorse in his voice that Veronica's heart tightened. It's not your fault, she said quietly. You tried, it just wasn't meant to be. They sat in silence for a long time. The snowstorm outside grew heavier, casting a twilight gloom in the room. Finally, Veronica looked up at Miguel. "Tell me about her," she asked. "About my mother. What was she like?" The old man slowly rose from his chair, went to a cabinet, and pulled out a worn leather-bound photo album. "Here," he said, tenderly running his hand over the cover. "This is her life. I kept it, even though your father asked me not to. Said it only reopened old wounds. But I couldn't. I couldn't let her memory fade." He opened the album, and Veronica saw a young girl in a school uniform, with braids and a violin in her hands. This was her at music school, Miguel explained. She was a prodigy. By the age of 12, she could already play Paganini. The album continued with photos of young Margarita performing at conservatory concerts, surrounded by fellow students. Miguel told stories about each picture, where and when it was taken, what was happening in Margarita Santana's life at the time. "And this is your mother with your father," he said, pointing to a picture of a happy couple standing in front of a marriage registry building. They met at a concert where Margarita performed Tchaikovsky. He was a journalist, writing about classical music. Fell in love with her at first sight. It took her 2 years to reciprocate. Veronica studied the face of the tall man with a kind, open expression who had his arm around her mother's shoulders. "And here's you," Miguel said, turning the page. "You were about 8 months old, I believe." The photo showed Margarita holding a chubby baby in a lace bonnet, smiling a toothless grin. "Rita adored you," the professor said softly. "She said you were her greatest masterpiece. Greater than any music she had ever created." "Created?" Veronica asked. "She composed music?" "Yes, and very beautifully. I still have some of her compositions." She had dreamed of releasing an album, but she never got the chance. The pain in his voice was so raw that Veronica instinctively reached out and touched his hand. "Tell me how she died," she asked gently. Miguel sighed deeply again. They were returning from a concert tour. It was late October. The roads were icy, and the driver lost control. Your mother was sitting in the back, with her accompanist. They both died instantly. The driver and the director of the Philharmonic, who were in the front seats, survived. He paused, gathering strength. "You weren't in the car, you were home with your father. That probably saved your life." The funeral was heartbreaking. "Your father," he turned to stone from grief. "A week after the funeral, he packed up and left with you. Didn't even tell me where. Only much later did I learn he had moved in with his mother. But he never tried to contact me. And then came the news of his death." "And his mother? My grandmother?" Veronica asked. "She was very old and sick. As far as I know, she died shortly after your father." "And after that?" "After that, the trail went cold. I tried finding you through acquaintances, through official records, but with no success. Eventually, I told myself maybe it was for the best. I thought you'd been adopted by a good family and given a new life, a new name." "No one adopted me," Veronica said quietly. "I grew up in an orphanage. And my name was always Santana." Miguel gently turned a few more pages of the album. This was Margarita's last concert, a week before she died. She played Brahms. The audience gave her a standing ovation. Late into the night, Miguel told Veronica stories about her mother. How Margarita had begun her musical journey, how she entered the conservatory, how she conquered competition after competition. How she had dreamed of opening a music school for orphans because she came from a modest background herself and knew how hard it was for a talented child without connections or money to make it. She used to say that music saves the soul, Miguel recalled. Especially a child's soul. She believed that every child should have the chance to find themselves through art, even if they never became a professional musician. It makes a person whole, it helps them survive hardships. Veronica listened silently, afraid to miss a single word. Finally, noticing that Miguel was tired, she helped him lie down and prepared to leave. Veronica, he called out as she reached the door, please come tomorrow. I have something for you, something that belonged to your mother. I'll be here, she promised. Now get some rest. It had been an extraordinary day. As she stepped out of the room, Veronica leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her mind was a whirlwind, her heart pounded wildly. In one evening, she had learned more about her family than in her entire life. She had a mother, a talented violinist and composer. She had had a loving and caring father. And now she had found a godfather, an elderly, gruff man who was nonetheless a living link to her origins, a keeper of her parents' memory. Walking back to the dormitory late that night, Veronica didn't feel her usual exhaustion. A strange energy surged within her, a mixture of excitement, joy, sorrow, and hope. At home, she pulled her old teddy bear out of the closet and hugged it tightly to her chest. Can you imagine? She whispered to it. I had a family, and it seems I have one again. After this life-changing revelation, Veronica's life changed completely. Now she came to care not only according to her work schedule, but whenever she had a free moment, eagerly absorbing every scrap of information about her real family. Miguel Navarro became more than just a patient. He became a living bridge to the past she had never known. Look, he said one day, pulling out a small jewelry box from an old suitcase. Your mother kept her treasures here when she was a little girl. Her first competition medal, a lock of your grandmother's hair, programs from her first concerts. Veronica carefully sorted through these precious mementos of another life, trying to imagine the little girl who would grow up to become her mother, lovingly placing these keepsakes into the box. The next day, Miguel handed Veronica a small bundle wrapped in velvet cloth. This belonged to your mother, he said quietly. I kept it, hoping someday I could give it to you. Inside was an antique amethyst brooch, simple, yet elegant. Margarita wore it at every concert, Miguel explained. She said it was her good luck charm. It had been a gift from her grandmother. Now, the brooch was always with Veronica, a modest piece of jewelry that reminded her of the mother she had never known but could now finally imagine. One of the most special discoveries for Veronica was her mother's music. Miguel had preserved not only old recordings of Margarita's concerts but also handwritten music sheets of her own compositions. She had a special gift, he said, gently turning the yellowed pages. She didn't just play music, she lived it. One day, Miguel suggested teaching Veronica to play. Not the violin, it would have taken years, but on a simple electronic keyboard that he asked his son to send from abroad. It's never too late to start, he said, seeing the doubt on Veronica's face. Besides, it's in your blood. And so the lessons began. Veronica's fingers, accustomed to medical procedures, were clumsy on the keyboard at first, but Miguel proved to be a patient teacher. Gradually, simple melodies started to take shape, and her eyes lit up with delight whenever real music flowed from under her fingers. Amazing, Miguel Navarro once remarked as he watched Veronica practice a simple sonatina. You have the same hand movements as Margarita. Even the way you tilt your head when you listen to the melody, nature always finds its way. February turned out to be bitterly cold. Miguel increasingly complained of chest pains and grew tired more quickly. Veronica noticed these changes with professional concern and insisted on a thorough examination. The results were discouraging. Miguel's heart was deteriorating faster than the doctors had anticipated. How much time do I have left? He asked the cardiologist bluntly when the diagnosis was delivered. With strict adherence to treatment and constant medication, several months, perhaps a year, the doctor replied, avoiding Veronica's gaze. After the doctor left, Miguel looked at the stunned girl and unexpectedly smiled. Don't look at me like that, Veronica. I'm 83 years old. I've lived a long, interesting life. And most importantly, I found you. Now I can leave in peace. Don't say that, Veronica exclaimed, brushing away unexpected tears. We'll fight. I'll research new treatments, clinical trials. Miguel shook his head gently. No need. Everything is as it should be. But there is something we must discuss while there's still time. That evening, he told Veronica about his decision to rewrite his will. "I have some property," he said. "My son lives abroad. He has a good job, he's well off. We've discussed it, he agrees it's only right that part of my estate should go to you." "But I can't," Veronica began. "You can," Miguel interrupted her firmly. "You're my goddaughter. By law and by heart, you're part of my family. And you're Margarita's daughter. She would have wanted you to have a home, not to work yourself to exhaustion as you do now." Seeing how important this was to him, Veronica didn't argue. She only asked, "And your son? Won't he mind? Rodrigo?" Miguel smiled. "He's a good man. I regret he visits so rarely, but his work keeps him traveling constantly. He knows about you. I told him as soon as I realized who you were. He offered to fly over to meet you, but I told him there was no need to rush." In March, Miguel's health worsened sharply. He spent more time in bed, barely able to get up. Veronica arranged with the management at CARE to move into an unused staff room. She prepared for her exams right by Miguel's bedside, and despite his weakness, he continued teaching her music and telling her stories from the past. On the 1st of April, Rodrigo finally arrived. A tall man in his 40s, with the same piercing blue eyes as his father, he immediately earned Veronica's trust with his directness and sincerity. "My father spoke so much about you," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "He says you're a true healer at heart." "I'm still just a student," Veronica replied, embarrassed. "That doesn't matter. What matters is having a calling, and you have it," Rodrigo said seriously. "Thank you for taking care of him. These past few months were the happiest he had in a long time, thanks to you." Miguel was sleeping fitfully, and Veronica and Rodrigo spoke quietly in the small lounge at the end of the corridor. "He's leaving you the apartment in the city center," Rodrigo said unexpectedly, "and something else, something special. I won't spoil the surprise, he wants to tell you himself." Veronica blushed. "I feel awkward. You're his son, and And you're Margarita's daughter," Rodrigo interrupted gently. "My father loved her like his own child. I remember how he grieved when she died. And later, his endless attempts to find you. He hired private investigators, contacted social services, everything. But nothing came of it. And then one day, you simply walked through his door. He believes it was destiny." The next day, Miguel asked Veronica to help him sit by the window. He rarely left his bed now, but today he insisted. "The sun is beautiful today," he said, squinting against the bright spring light. "It's a perfect day to play Vivaldi." He looked unusually solemn. "Veronica," he said, once she had arranged him comfortably with cushions, "there's something important I need to tell you." Miguel explained that he had signed all the necessary papers. The apartment where he had lived before moving into the nursing home now belonged to Veronica. "You won't have to live in a dormitory anymore," he said. "It's a good apartment, spacious, 3 rooms, and a large library. Rodrigo has taken a few personal items, but most of the furnishings are still there. They're old but solid." Veronica began to protest, but Miguel stopped her with a wave of his hand. "It's settled. The papers are signed. But there's something else." He asked Rodrigo, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, to bring over a case from the wardrobe. Rodrigo carefully placed a long black case on Miguel's knees. "This is Margarita's violin," Miguel said, stroking the case tenderly. "Made by an Italian master in the 18th century, a very valuable instrument. Margarita won it at an international competition." He raised his eyes to Veronica. "Now it's yours." Veronica gasped. "But I don't know how to play. And it's so valuable." "You'll learn, if you want to," Miguel said softly. "And if not, keep it as a memory. Most importantly, I want you to know, your mother dreamed of opening a music school for underprivileged children, especially orphans. She knew how hard it was to make it without connections or money." He paused, catching his breath. "I'm not asking you to give up medicine. But maybe, someday, you'll fulfill her dream. In her memory. Veronica nodded silently, unable to speak through the lump in her throat. That night, Miguel's condition worsened dramatically. The doctors suggested hospitalization, but he firmly refused. "I want to die here, among my books and music," he said decisively. "Just ask Veronica to stay with me." Veronica didn't leave his bedside for a second. Rodrigo stayed too. They talked about music, about the future, about dreams. Despite his frailty, Miguel's mind remained astonishingly clear. "You know, Veronica," he said at dawn, when Rodrigo had briefly stepped out, "I'm grateful that I found you. It's as if the circle has closed. Now, when I meet Margarita again." He weakly waved his hand upward. "I'll be able to tell her that her daughter grew up to be a good person. A real person." On the afternoon of April 5th, Miguel Navarro peacefully passed away. He died in his sleep, a gentle smile on his lips, as if listening to a beautiful music no one else could hear. The bright spring sun flooded the grand hall of the old mansion. The tall windows stood open, letting in fresh air and the sounds of the waking city. On the wall hung a large portrait of a young woman with a violin, Margarita Santana, and beside it, a photograph of an elderly man with piercing blue eyes. "Welcome to the Margarita School of Music," Veronica smiled, addressing a group of children curiously looking around the new building. "My name is Veronica Santana, and I am the director of this school. This is Romualdo Fernandez, our piano teacher." The young man with long hair tied back in a ponytail nodded warmly to the kids. "Romualdo also grew up in an orphanage, just like you," Veronica continued. "And now he's a conservatory student and your teacher." It had been 5 years since Miguel Navarro's passing. 5 years filled with change and discovery. Veronica had finished medical school, earned her doctor's diploma, and even worked as a general practitioner for a year. But all that time, she never forgot her godfather's last wish, to make her mother's dream a reality, a music school for orphans. The apartment Miguel had left her became her true home, the first in her life. Its spacious rooms, high ceilings, and antique furniture breathed history and warmth. Veronica often spent evenings by the window, sorting through Miguel's archives, listening to recordings of her mother's music, and dreaming about the future. One day, while organizing Miguel's old papers, she found a letter from the city administration, dated 15 years earlier. It mentioned a possible project to turn an old mansion on the city outskirts into a music school. The project had never materialized, but the letter planted an idea. The following months were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and paperwork. Rodrigo supported her and helped with initial funding. The mansion, though in need of repairs, had retained its grandeur and was perfect for the school. Meanwhile, Veronica sought out allies. She visited orphanages, telling children about her project and offering free music lessons to anyone interested. That's how she met Romualdo, a talented pianist who, despite growing up in an orphanage, had made it into the conservatory. He became her first assistant. Others soon joined. Paulina, a music college student raised in foster care. Sebastian, a successful violinist who had never forgotten his orphanage roots. An elderly retired music teacher who simply wanted to help. Together, they formed the heart of what became the Margarita School of Music. The grand opening was held in September, on Margarita Santana's birthday. More children came than expected, 27 boys and girls from 3 different orphanages. The road ahead was long, but the first step had been taken. "Will we have real concerts?" asked a skinny 10-year-old boy as Veronica finished showing them around. "Of course," she smiled. "Do you like performing?" "I don't know," the boy shrugged. "I've never tried. But I'd like someone to listen to me. Just once." Veronica crouched down to his level. "What's your name?" "Victor." "Well, Victor," she said warmly, "you will be heard. And not just by someone, but by many. We'll have concerts every month. And a year from now, once you've learned to play, we'll organize a big festival. And there will be lots of people there." The boy's eyes lit up. Really? And people will clap for us? Of course, Veronica said, ruffling his hair. I promise. That day, she made many promises, to herself, to the children, to the memory of her mother and Miguel Navarro. And she was determined to keep them all. The first year of the school's existence turned out to be the hardest. There weren't enough instruments, money for utilities was tight, and sometimes there wasn't even enough time. Veronica still worked as a doctor, now in a private clinic to have a more flexible schedule. But the school lived, grew, and the children came with increasing enthusiasm. By the end of the first school year, they held their first recital. It was modest, just a few simple pieces, not always played confidently, but the effort was so heartfelt that the audience, mostly orphanage staff and other children, applauded warmly. After the concert, an elderly man in a formal suit approached Veronica. Outstanding work, he said, shaking her hand. I represent an arts support foundation. We would like to discuss possible cooperation. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The foundation awarded a grant to the school, allowing them to buy new instruments, expand their curriculum, and even organize a summer music camp for the children. Veronica's particular pride became the orchestra. Initially, a small ensemble of 5, it gradually grew into a full-fledged chamber orchestra, featuring not only students but also alumni and invited musicians. Among the school's cherished traditions were the Margarita Evenings, monthly concerts featuring compositions by Margarita Santana. Miguel Navarro had preserved all of Margarita's handwritten scores, and with the help of professional musicians, Veronica restored and adapted the pieces for students of varying skill levels. These evenings were special. Veronica always told the children about her mother, about her life, her dreams. For many of the orphans, Margarita's story became a source of inspiration, a talented woman who had once dreamed of helping children without families, and who, through Veronica, had returned to fulfill that mission. For the school's 5th anniversary, a major concert was planned at the city's Philharmonic Hall. Veronica was nervous. It would be the students' first real public performance at such a prestigious venue. It will be fine, Sebastian, now the school's artistic director, reassured her. The children are ready. They've worked so hard. The Philharmonic Hall was packed. Not only relatives and friends of the students attended, but also many townspeople, drawn by the school's touching story, which local newspapers had covered. The concert opened with Margarita Santana's piece Spring Awakening, performed by the school orchestra. When the last note faded, the hall erupted in applause. The children on stage beamed with happiness, and Veronica, standing backstage, discreetly wiped away tears. After the concert, a reception was held. Veronica represented the school, speaking about future plans, new programs, and scholarships for especially talented children. She felt, almost tangibly, that her mother and Miguel Navarro were somehow nearby, approving every word. Do you play yourself? An elderly woman asked after the formal part ended. A little, Veronica answered shyly. Miguel managed to give me a few lessons, and then I continued learning on my own. But I don't perform. Play something, the woman requested. In honor of the school's anniversary. Veronica wanted to refuse but caught Sebastian's encouraging glance and decided to go for it. All right, she said. But it will be a very simple piece. She climbed the stage where a grand piano already stood. But instead of sitting down at the piano, Veronica took out a violin case, the very one that had belonged to her mother, crafted by an Italian master. I'll play a lullaby, she said into the microphone. It's the first piece my mother, Margarita Santana, composed when she found out she was expecting a child. She called it Lullaby for a Daughter. The hall fell silent. Veronica raised the violin, resting it against her shoulder as Sebastian had taught her, and drew the bow across the strings. A tender, simple melody poured forth, slightly hesitant, not always technically perfect, but played with such feeling that many listeners instinctively closed their eyes, lost in the music. As she played, Veronica realized she was feeling true peace for the first time in her life. As if all the pieces of her life's puzzle had finally fallen into place. She had found her family, not just in the fleeting images of her mother and godfather, but in these children whom she was helping find themselves through music. In these young musicians who had overcome hardships and found their calling. In this community of kindred spirits united around the idea of giving hope to orphans. The circle had closed, from her mother, through her godfather, to herself. From loneliness to finding roots and a new family. From emptiness to a life filled with meaning. When the last note faded, there was a moment of stillness in the hall, and then thunderous applause. But Veronica barely heard it. She was looking at the portrait of her mother, displayed on stage, and it seemed to her that Margarita was smiling back. "I did it, Mama," Veronica whispered. "Your dream has come true." Late that night, after the concert, Veronica returned to the now empty school. She walked through the quiet corridors, peeking into classrooms where music and children's voices had filled the air earlier. In the director's office, she paused before the wall where two portraits hung, Margarita and Miguel Navarro. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For everything." Then Veronica sat at her desk, opened a drawer, and took out the old photograph she had once found in Miguel Navarro's nightstand. The yellowed image showed a young woman who resembled Veronica so closely that sometimes she still couldn't believe it. Next to it lay a tablet with new applications from orphanages. The school planned to accept another 30 students the following year. It's never too late to start a new life and find a family, Veronica thought, carefully putting the photo back into the drawer. She knew this better than anyone else. She had traveled a long path, from a lonely orphanage girl to a person with a place in the world and a mission that brought joy not only to herself but to many others. Outside, a new day was beginning. The sun was slowly rising over the city, promising clear weather. Veronica smiled, looking forward to a day filled with music, children's laughter, and small new discoveries. After all, she now had a family, big, lively, and incredibly talented. An unexpected encounter, she thought. Sometimes it can change your whole life. Thank you, Miguel Navarro, for not sending me away that first day. Thank you for recognizing Margarita's daughter in me. Thank you for giving me back my family and a new purpose. In the background, Chopin's music, Miguel Navarro's favorite, played softly. Veronica closed her eyes, listening to the familiar melody, feeling the invisible presence of those who had forever changed her destiny. Her phone rang, pulling her back to the present. It was Sebastian, reminding her about today's auditions for new students. "Of course, I remember," Veronica replied. "I'll be there in an hour." She stood up, cast one more glance at the photographs on the wall, and smiled. Ahead of her lay a new day, new encounters, new discoveries. Life continued, and it was beautiful.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.